Good news about the German economy is hard to come by these days. Instead, German industrial production fell for the third straight month in July. It is the latest news fanning fears of a prolonged downturn in Europe's largest economy, in which companies are facing, among other things, high energy prices, sluggish global demand, and a situation in which competitors are now setting benchmarks.
A new phrase is popping up among German car executives, China speed. That's how fast they feel they need to move to catch up to the Chinese car industry that's grown into a battery-powered juggernaut. At this year's IAA, or International Mobility Show, there were no less than 7 Chinese e-vehicle brands on offer. And even some of the traditional fans of German cars, middle-aged and older German men who make time to visit an auto show in Munich, even they are starting to get curious about competitors from abroad.
In theory, yes. I would buy a Chinese electric car. I still drive a Mercedes at my age, a great car and a combustion engine. But I have to look to the future, so when I compare, electric is clearly great. The Chinese are of course better when it comes to pricing than Volkswagen. I'm very disappointed by Volkswagen.
The numbers don't lie, and they aren't looking good for German car makers abroad or at home. This year, all-electric Chinese car maker BYD overtook Volkswagen as China's best-selling brand. Here in Germany, the auto industry shrank by 3.5% in June compared with the previous month. That drag is slowing down German industrial production at large, which shrank by 1.5% during the same period.
China has a huge electric car market. It's the biggest in the world. So the technologies they're developing there, when Europe is going increasingly electric, it's no wonder that they kind of think there's a good market to grow into. And I think what's fascinating is just that kind of that balance and that tension. They are coming over and sort of pushing the European firms. But this is a motor show is a chance for them to come and say we should be taken seriously. So you can see their cars next to the established brands.
The German government is rushing to respond to production concerns in the country. Last week, it approved 32 billion euros in corporate tax cuts over 4 years to help revive production in Europe's largest economy. This week, it announced plans to massively expand EV charging stations around the country. And the government is also proposing cutting down on the mounds of paperwork needed by businesses. But in a country where 80% of companies still use fax machines, it's unclear if German odometers will ever hit China speed.
For some more analysis, let's bring in Holger Schmieding. He's the chief economist at Berenberg Bank. Welcome back to the program, Holger. Is the situation of Germany's car makers somewhat emblematic for the German economy as a whole? Once pretty innovative, but by now complacent and a victim of its own convoluted ways?
Well, somewhat is probably the right way to describe it. Yes, Germany as a whole enjoyed a golden decade from 2010 onwards. The country, in terms of its economic policy, and the companies in the country, to some extent, became a bit complacent based on that success. Still, the problems of the car sector are a bit special, because China has thrown vast resources at the sector. China has basically bought itself a technological lead in parts of electric mobility at huge costs in terms of missed opportunities for China to spend the money better. China has shown that you can buy market share, even if it's expensive, in the sense that China really has too much domestic debt, and the German car sector is at the receiving end of that. Other sectors are probably a bit less troubled, abstracting from energy-intensive industries.
Let's try to take a look at the bigger picture here. I mean, there's a series of worrying trends within the German economy. We have weak industrial output, we have problems in the construction sector, and declining private consumption. Which is the most severe, the most troubling?
Well, at the moment, it is declining industrial output. Germany is a heavily industry-dependent economy. Depends a lot on exporting goods to the world. And we see a sharp downturn in global manufacturing, partly an inventory correction after companies built up a lot of inventories early in the year, late last year, once supply chain lockdowns had eased. But this inventory correction in global manufacturing is temporary. That will likely be over roughly by the end of the year. And I look forward to some rebound in manufacturing starting probably next spring onwards. Germany still has significant strength. So far, it has record employment and it has the strongest fiscal position of all major European economies, in the sense Germany can weather a significant cyclical downturn.
Yet at the same time, Holger, there are so many industrial companies who are complaining about various things. On top of the list is high energy costs. So how do you figure should be dealt with it? I mean, some in the German government are proposing the state should temporarily subsidize energy for big industrial companies.
Well, high energy costs are indeed a big problem, but they are not a specific German problem. They are basically a European problem relative to, say, the US and some other parts of the world.
Germany has the biggest energy prices in the world.
Well, actually, not really. Industrial energy prices for large users in some countries in Europe are actually higher than in Germany. The German prices are high, but they are not the highest. The point is they have, of course, risen significantly further in the wake of Putin's onslaught on Ukraine. And now energy-intensive industries are indeed leaving or pondering to leave. That, however, does not mean that a lot of capacity will be lost for good. After all, we have a serious shortage of labor still. That is, people who may no longer find the job in parts of chemicals will probably, once the current cyclical downturn is over, find a job elsewhere and be productive in other sectors of industry or in services.
All right, let's see if that'll happen, if your prediction will come true, Holger. The current government has promised to cut down on bureaucracy. There have been several initiatives like that enshrined in the law in recent years. Yet, here we are. How confident are you that something will change now when it comes to red tape?
Well, this is unfortunately a very gradual process. I'm confident that a few things will change, following the example of rapid approval for the LNG terminals last year. Having said that, again, this will be a gradual process which will over time help to stabilize and strengthen the German economy a bit. Back to the question of energy prices, my favorite is not a specific subsidy for energy-intensive big industries. My favorite is to reduce the burden of energy prices for all companies, including the Mittelstand, which is, unlike big industry, really the backbone of the German economy.
A number of economic research institutions have been lowering the economic forecast for Germany this week, expecting the economy to shrink by around 0.5 percentage point next year. What is your estimate?
Well, we indeed expect the economy to shrink by about 0.5 percentage point this year and to grow modestly next year, not very much, but modest growth, as likely from spring onwards we will see the global manufacturing cycle, including this inventory correction, to turn up again.
What would a shrinking economy mean for Germany as a country?
Well, Germany is a highly cyclical economy because of its dependence on the global market. So in a way, we are used to significant downturns, more than in many other European countries, which are less glued to the global market for goods. And typically, when there is an upswing, Germany also does fairly well. The German labor market will likely see a modest rise in unemployment because companies will probably reduce their hiring quite a lot. But with our system of furlough schemes, that is government support for underemployment on the job, we will likely not see a major rise in dismissals. And probably the fiscal situation will still remain healthier than in most other European countries.
On that note, Are you so confident about that? Because when we look at what the German finance minister has been saying in recent days, and when we look at what the government has been spending during the pandemic and in response to Russia's aggression on Ukraine, one could get the idea that the government's coffers are pretty empty.
Well, to some extent, you could say that the government's coffers are empty. If your benchmark is this German debt brake, which is basically we want to have hardly any fiscal deficit at all, then of course Germany faces serious fiscal problems. But if you look at the outlook for the German deficit and for the debt burden of the government relative to almost all other countries, then you still conclude that Germany is in a less bad and in much less bad shape than most others. In Germany, the rise in the public debt ratio as a share of GDP has been, in the wake of the pandemic, and even in the wake of the energy crisis, been smaller than in most other countries and far smaller than, for instance, in the US or the UK.
Holger Schmieding, Berenberg Bank's chief economist. Holger, as always, thank you for your thoughts.
Thanks for the discussion.